Is your project management paradigm leaving you unsatisfied? Are you using Waterfall and constantly replanning because the assumptions you made are incorrect? Are you meeting with your tech lead to build the work breakdown structure and she says, "You're asking me to solve a problem that's never been solved before. I have 3 ideas and I think one of them will probably work, but I don't know which one. I know how to get started and I have a pretty good idea of what I'll be doing for the next quarter, but after that it gets very fuzzy." Are you doing Agile and every project is late because nobody knows what the critical path is, resources aren't properly allocated, and long lead time parts aren't being ordered in time? Is doing a demo after every sprint impossible because it takes a month to build a prototype? Then maybe what you need is adaptive project management. Adaptive project management won't save your life, but it might save your project or your job.
My name is Andy Silber, and I'm a physicist, engineer, project manager, and author of Adaptive Project Management, Leading Complex and Uncertain Projects. I am not a used car salesman, but I play one on YouTube videos. I'm here to talk about project management paradigm that you probably haven't considered, adaptive project management, which in brief uses waterfall tools with an agile mindset and is tailored to the needs of developing innovative hardware products. There's no official adaptive manifesto, but my proposal is reduce risk and uncertainty early and often. Secondarily, focus on the critical path and long lead time items. Do sufficient planning to accomplish the first 2 elements, replan often, and collaborate. And by collaborate, I mean everyone, from an intern to a senior stakeholder, work as a single team. This is based on decades of experience developing innovative hardware products, where I learned that Waterfall was too inflexible and Agile doesn't give the PM the tools needed to manage the complexity of creating innovative hardware. And just as Agile has been found to be useful beyond software development, an adaptive approach can be used to solve other problems as well. A matter of fact, my favorite example of an adaptive project was not hardware development, but the Core of Discovery led by Lewis and Clark. This is a project that had a clear goal of reaching the Pacific, focused on reducing uncertainty and risk by studying previous expeditions, training, gathering supplies, and building the right team. They started with a detailed plan for the early days, and they never stopped working on reducing uncertainty and risk. An Agile team would have left too soon, without sufficient study and preparation, and they probably would have died. A Waterfall team would have never left St. Louis. Only an adaptive approach had a chance of success. I'm going to assume that you already know the basics of Waterfall and Agile project management. You don't have to be a certified project management professional or Scrum Master to appreciate what I'm saying, but you should understand concepts like the work breakdown structure, what a Gantt chart is, the critical path, and the role of the product owner. If you can define these terms, you'll have no trouble following this video. And I'm not here to bash either Waterfall or Agile. They are both great at doing what they were designed for. But there are some projects where neither paradigm is fit for purpose. For instance, creating novel physical product, like what has been a large part of my career, doesn't work well with either Waterfall nor Agile. So the first question you need to ask yourself is which paradigm makes sense for my project? To my thinking, there are 2 main inputs in deciding which paradigm to use. The first input is complexity. This refers to the complexity of the plan, not of the solution. For instance, if you're building a house, you'll need to install the wiring, have it inspected, and then finish the drywall. If you do things out of order, you'll be wasting a lot of time and effort. Having to track and manage dependencies makes a plan complex. Long lead time items are also an element of complexity. It may only take 5 minutes to order a part, but if it won't arrive for 6 months, you'll need to order it well before you need it. If the critical path is important and not obvious, then your plan is complex. The second input is certainty. You might launch a project without clear requirements, just a sense of what problem you'll be solving. You might also need to research several possible solutions and do user testing to see which is preferred or even works. Maybe you'll be using new parts that are cutting edge and not fully documented, or older parts in a novel way, and you think this may allow for a solution that was previously impossible. But you don't know if it'll work or even how much effort will be required to even know if they'll work. There are certainly other issues, like training of the team and leadership. But if your leadership insists on Waterfall or Agile, then that's the paradigm you'll be using, even if there might be one better suited to your project. If your project is not complex and has few unknowns, then any paradigm will work. I'd recommend the minimally viable process. In other words, keep it simple. I'd probably just put my tasks or requirements in a spreadsheet, assign people to work on them, and track progress. It can be very simple. If your project has complexity, but not a lot of uncertainty, then Waterfall is a clear winner. Just take your known requirements, build your work breakdown structure, put it in a tool like MS Project, put in the dependencies and the durations, and just start executing. But if as you're building your plan, you keep finding yourself saying, I'd feel more confident if I knew X, then maybe Waterfall is not the way to go. If your requirements are incomplete or your solution is not yet known, Agile might work for you. This is almost always the case for software, since Agile was designed specifically with the needs for software development in mind. But if you need to manage dependencies or long lead time items, Agile doesn't do that well. Most Agile tools like Jira won't help you determine the critical path, since that's not really part of software development. Also, Agile requires you to do a demo of a working version after every sprint. So if completing a build requires more than pushing a button, then Agile might not be for you. So adaptive comes in when you have both complexity and uncertainty. If you're doing something tried and true, like building a high-rise or setting up an e-commerce platform, then don't bother with adaptive. But if you're trying to do something innovative, something no one has done before, then you need to accept no one knows how long this is going to take, or even if it's possible. You need a paradigm that gives you the tools to tell the difference between the barely possible and the impossible and move forward intelligently. Everyone needs to understand that if failure is not an option, then innovation is not an opportunity. In a nutshell, my version of adaptive is to use Waterfall tools with an Agile mindset. Now, there are other practitioners who might have something else that they call adaptive, or they may have something very similar that they call iterative or rolling wave or something different than adaptive, but it basically is adaptive in my mind. There hasn't been a meeting of practitioners where we all sat around and agreed on an adaptive manifesto, at least not one that I was invited to. And saying to use Waterfall tools with an Agile mindset sounds easy, but it's not. But it's also not that hard. So in practice, what is an adaptive approach? One can think of every project as having three elements. The first is reducing uncertainty. The second is minimizing risk. And the third is actually developing your solution. This project can be broken into stages or phases. At the end of each phase, there should be a stage gate review with the stakeholders where the team presents what they've learned and a proposal for the next phase. This meeting is a good time for the stakeholders to introduce new requirements or pivot based upon what you've learned or changes in the business environment. The review ends with a go, no-go decision. Here we see a hypothetical 6-phase project and the level of effort spent on reducing uncertainty in each phase. In phase 1, that's about all we're doing, and in each successive phase, our focus on uncertainty is reduced, but never goes to zero, even in the final stage. Here we've added our risk reduction effort, which might include testing or developing mitigation plans. As we reduce our uncertainty, our efforts turn primarily to risk reduction. Even in the final phase of the project, we're still engaged in risk reduction. And here I've added our development work, which doesn't even get started until phase 3, but quickly rises as we've removed most of our uncertainty and risks. You don't want to start your development work too soon because you're likely to end up wasting effort that would have been better spent on removing uncertainty and risk. You might be wondering, what's the difference between a risk and uncertainty? Sometimes it's pretty clear, like what does my customer want is an uncertainty. Will my device pass FCC requirements for unintended emission? That's a risk. If you understand the issue well enough to write a testable requirement, then it's a risk. If you don't understand it well enough to write a testable requirement, then you can treat it as an uncertainty. It doesn't necessarily matter. The key is to focus on the issues, risks, and uncertainties that allow you to down select from possible solutions to one that will meet your customer's needs. To get started, brainstorm with the team all of the questions you'd like to have answered as you move forward with the project. Nothing is out of bounds, from user needs to end-of-life recycling. And if possible, break the questions down into smaller, more fundamental questions. For instance, is processor XYZ sufficient for our needs can be a pretty broad question for a chip you've never seen. You might break it into 3 more fundamental questions. Is the energy consumption low enough? Is the processing power sufficient? And is the dev environment sufficient? You don't need to list every possible question, only those that might be an issue. For instance, if the device is plugged in and stationary, then energy consumption is unlikely to be a big concern. If it's handheld, the dimensions of the device might be important. Then determine which of these questions could kill the project. I once worked on a product where the smallest dimensions we could achieve exceeded those of our competitors, and that this was a critical parameter for our customers. This project could have been killed quickly, but instead lingered for years. Another one I worked on required distribution partners that didn't exist. This is all part of the fail fast mentality, which is very much embraced by adaptive project management. And this should be the focus of your early phases. These issues should be kept in a risk/uncertainty register, like the one shown here. And this document must be kept current as we reduce uncertainty and mitigate risks. This will be one of the key documents the team shares with the stakeholders as part of every status report. Work with your team to build a waterfall-style plan for Phase 1 that addresses the most important questions and the critical risks. It might be building prototypes that you show to users for feedback, or it might be taking a sensor and making signal-to-noise measurements in the target environment. It'll probably include talking to end users about the problem you're solving and getting their point of view. If the task is routine, for instance stuffing a PCB with components, then you should have a solid duration for your plan. But for tasks that are novel, just work with the team to quickly agree on ballpark estimates. The person who makes the estimation should be the person who will be doing the work. Ask them to estimate a minimum and a maximum duration for each task, and that they are 80% certain that the task will take longer than the minimum and less than the maximum. As the project progresses, make sure that you're tracking the quality of the estimations and that you provide the individuals with feedback. The goal of this is only to improve their estimates in the future. You're better off executing than spending too much time estimating durations, since in my experience, it doesn't matter how much time and discussion you spend, your estimates don't get more accurate. If they're wrong, that's just part of the learning that is a fundamental aspect of adaptive project management, especially in the early phases. You can get started on Phase 1 right away, but don't stop planning. Build out your Phase 2 plan, but with less detail and precision. Then move on to Phase 3 with even less detail. Move forward as far as you can with each progressing phase having less detail. I once was brought on by a company to consult on a product development process on something they thought was going to take 9 months. After a couple of days of talking with the team, I built up a high-level schedule that showed that it was going to take 18 months if everything went perfectly. That's what I'm talking about. This is to give your leadership a sense of how long the journey will be. Look at the critical path to complete the current phase and the entire project. It will be wrong, but it should be your best guess given what you know at this time. Make sure you're doing everything you can now to shorten the duration of both the phase and the total project. This might include bringing in some risk or development work while you're focused on uncertainties. So far, this has been fairly waterfall, other than the fact that our requirements will probably be incomplete. But once you get started, the Agile mindset starts to play. Don't organize the work into sprints, but at least every 2 weeks and probably once a week, send out a status update with everything you've learned, which is still very waterfall. The difference is you send an updated plan based on what you've learned. This might change the date or scope of the next stage gate review, so it's critical that your stakeholders know that and why. Use all your standard tools like putting tasks in parallel and extra resources on the critical path. Adaptive project management is not an excuse for sloppy project management. But if you just learned something surprising, how could that not change your plan? This Agile mindset lets you launch more quickly and not overplan in a situation where you don't have enough information to fully plan, even if you wanted to. At the end of each phase, there should be a stage gate review where the team presents what they've learned and a proposal for the next phase. There should be no surprises because you've been clearly communicating throughout the phase. This is mainly a chance for the stakeholders to ask any questions they have and provide feedback. The stakeholders might also want to introduce new requirements or a pivot based upon what we've learned at this time. If there is significant changes to the plan based upon the input from the stakeholders, you might want to take a pause, regroup, replan, and then reconvene the group to present the new plan to move forward. You would think that going from waterfall to adaptive would be simple since you use the same tools in nearly identical ways. And for the team, you'd be correct. The challenge is with the stakeholders who are used to seeing a Gantt chart and treating it like a commitment. In most waterfall organizations, stakeholders aren't used to playing the role of an agile product owner. What they're used to is they hand you a list of requirements and that you deliver a product before the time and resources are consumed. But for an adaptive project, you either don't have a complete list of requirements or you don't know how to solve the problem. So a waterfall approach doesn't make a lot of sense. The biggest challenge is to get your stakeholders to engage with the project like product owners, to read the status reports, to respond to emails, to attend meetings. You must get a commitment from the stakeholders to appoint a product owner who will engage with the team deeply. If the stakeholders can't appoint a product owner who engages with the team, then I would recommend not even trying an adaptive approach. The stakeholders must embrace the risks and uncertainties that are part of the project and work with the team to reduce them. They must create an environment of psychological safety. I once worked at a company where a 1-week slip in schedule meant the CEO would scream and swear at the PM in large meetings. That kind of environment can never be adaptive. When the team learns something surprising and presents it to the stakeholders must respond with, "Great, glad we learned that. Now, how do we move forward or not?" Everyone must understand what's a need and what's a want. The team focuses first on the needs, and when they show those can be met, moves on to the wants. If not all the needs can be satisfied, then at the next stage gate review or sooner, the team meets with the stakeholders and decides how to move forward, which might be killing the project. That is, fail fast. If there isn't buy-in from the top, from a more agile way of thinking and an understanding that adherence to scope and schedule cannot be a priority, for a project that might not even be possible, then I would recommend not even trying adaptive. You can move forward with waterfall one phase at a time. To be clear, some organizations do what they call waterfall that looks a lot like what I'm calling adaptive. And that's great. If it's working for you, just keep it up. In case you haven't seen it before, this is the Agile Manifesto. We value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. There are many flavors of Agile, but they all adhere to these basic values. For an Agile team trying adaptive, start with the fact of pointing out that adaptive project management follows the Agile Manifesto, especially responding to change over following a plan. There are no guaranteed deliverables, just a commitment to communicate honestly and timely about everything and working towards meeting the customer's needs. Sounds pretty agile. Look at the tools the team uses and determine if you can make them work. Changing tools is a bear, but in adaptive project management, knowing your critical path is very important, and so you'll need to figure out a way to be able to do that. One possibility is to have the project plan in two different tools at the same time. One, like MS Project, that helps you determine the critical path, and another that the team uses to know what they work on day to day. If you take this approach, then budget a lot of time for the PM to keep the tools in sync. This is not best practice, but it's okay to do it once while you're experimenting with adaptive project management. But if you want this to be a tool in your arsenal, you will need to transition to a platform that allows you to manage complex dependencies, determine critical path, and track long lead time items. For the stakeholders, the change is very easy. They may not have to do anything differently at all. Most Agile practices work well in an adaptive world. Things like the bi-weekly demo is a great chance to meet and share with the stakeholders what you've learned. About the only thing I wouldn't do is break the work into sprints. In my personal experience, I've been at small companies with no established project management methodology trying to solve problems with complexity and uncertainty. The first time was at a startup, and I just did what made sense, which looks a lot like what I've talked about here. The next time was at an older company with a strong anti-process bias, and despite my best effort, we were not able to establish any kind of methodology, despite this company's in desperate need of some rigor. Projects there typically took twice as long as they should if they were ever completed at all. For large and established companies with entrenched project management practices, you may find resistance to experimenting with adaptive project management. You'll probably need to find a sponsor inside the project management office to set up a pilot project to experiment with adaptive project management, and if things go well, to work to create a set of standard operating procedures that can be used in the future. If you find resistance inside the PMO, and you probably will, then you'll need to work with your project sponsor to understand how you can experiment and tweak the current practices to bring in an adaptive spin to the project. Running an adaptive project is like organizing a road trip to Dollywood, avoiding the freeways. You have a map, that's your plan, and you know how to drive and you know your destination. But you don't plan for every stop at a red light. You won't know if it's red or green until you get there. You might come into a town and check out the restaurants, but just before you decide where to have dinner. You might drive 200 miles in a day or 300, depending on how the team is feeling. But you all know where you're headed. That's what it's like to run an adaptive project. Keep your eye on the goal, but plan as little as possible, but not less than that. There's an old saw that when the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem is a nail. I'm trying to wrench that hammer out of your hand and give you some pliers so bad things don't happen. Like every other tool, adaptive project management can be used appropriately or inappropriately. It can be used well or poorly. It's just another tool to have in your tool belt to solve some of your problems. Adaptive project management won't save your life, but it might save your project or your job. If you've learned anything, please like and subscribe and share with anyone you think might be interested, especially project managers. And if you have any questions or ideas for future videos, please put them in the comments section. And thanks so much for your time, the most valuable resource we have.